Well, it's now 2:01, and we've got a critical mass of people that have joined us. And let me say welcome to everybody. Welcome to those who are joining us for this online presentation of our Wednesday at 2, the Columbus Museum of Art's Wednesday at 2 program today. The title, as you can see on the screen, is Wyeth and Cadmus, Dance, Music, and Male Muses. I'll explain that in a minute. But first, I wanted to introduce myself. I'm David Stark. I'm the Chief Curator at the Columbus Museum of Art. And I'm very excited that we have a guest curator joining us from the Brandywine River Museum of Art, and that is Amanda Burden, who you should see on your screen, either next to, above, or below my image. And Amanda joined the curatorial staff of the Brandywine River Museum of Art in 2012. She previously worked at East Coast museums, including the Florence Griswold Museum in Connecticut, the Philadelphia Museum of Art, and the Museum of Art of the Rhode Island School of Design, where I worked for a time too, and I didn't even realize that until we started working on this program together, that we were both at RISD for a time. So Amanda received her PhD at Brown University, writing her dissertation on American women artists in Paris in the late 19th century. And she's curated many exhibitions, including a retrospective exhibition of the art of Jamie Wyeth, one of the artists that we'll be discussing today, which was at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in 2015. And she has, I'd like to mention, 2 upcoming exhibitions that she's curating. One on American Impressionism that opens in January of 2021 at the Dixon Gallery and Gardens in Memphis, and its final venue will be the Brandywine Museum. And then in 2022, she's curating an exhibition called Jamie Wyeth Unsettled that will open at the Brandywine Museum and travel to other locations. Now, before going any further, I should mention a few housekeeping details. If you have questions for us, and we hope to reserve a little time at the end of our presentation to respond to questions, you can put them under Q&A. That is, you should see a little icon that says Q&A with what look like little cartoon bubbles, either at the top or the bottom of your screen. You may have to move your mouse around for those, or for the Q&A bubbles to pop up. But if you enter questions there, if you type them in, we'll be able to see them and respond. And if you have technologic difficulty or difficulties with your technology, if the image on your screen is too small, if you can't, well, I guess if you can't hear us, what I'm saying now won't do any good. But if you do have technology issues, there is another function called chat that also has, there's an icon, at least on some computers, of the cartoon bubble, what look like cartoon bubbles, is similar to Q&A. So if you click on chat and enter your questions, we have 2 skilled technology helpers through the Columbus Museum that will respond and should be able to help you out there, or if you'd like to chat with each other. But we will see the questions that you enter under Q&A, and also wanted to let you know that we are recording this session. Now, Amanda, unless you have anything to add or say at this point, I think I'll plunge into what our topic is. I already read the title, and this has to do with 2 installations that went up within the last month or so at the Columbus Museum of Art. One which consists of work from our permanent collection, and that would be a painting by Paul Cadmus called the ribbon, I'll translate the title, The Ribbon Untied, Hommage to Reynaldo Hahn, Le Ruban Dénoué, Hommage à Reynaldo Hahn, in French. It's, the artist titled it in French, but I will use the English title. And in addition to the painting itself, what I really want to devote some attention to are 4 preparatory drawings that are hung along with it. And in addition, there's another installation in a nearby corridor, again in the museum, from loans of paintings from the Brandywine Museum, courtesy of Amanda, who helped facilitate this. And these are portraits of the ballet dancer Rudolf Nuriev, and they were painted by Jamie Wyeth. And the artist, Jamie Wyeth, is the son of the very well-known Andrew Wyeth, and the grandson of N.C. Wyeth, an illustrator, the painter, Andrew Wyeth. And Amanda will tell you a little bit about the background and biography of Jamie Wyeth as we go on. But we have 6 portraits of Nuriev. This is one of the 6. And we have 4 preparatory drawings for the Cadmus painting. Now, why are we talking about these together in this particular Wednesday at 2 program? Well, they're linked by a number of themes or concepts. One has to do with music and dance. Ronaldo Hahn was a turn of the century musician, composer, music critic. And of course, we have the dance, the fact that Nuriev was a ballet dancer. And in both instances, the works are connected by the presence of, or there's a strong current of homoeroticism that runs through both paintings that we'll both talk about. And there's also the fact that there's the theme of artistic creation that we can talk a lot about in relationship to both works, the relationship of the artist to the subject and the process of creation. And then finally, there was the most concrete connection of all, perhaps, biographical connections between these 2 artists who were of different generations, but they knew each other. And so Amanda is going to talk to us about the Wyeth paintings, about Jamie Wyeth, and she has a tremendous a tremendous depth of knowledge about both Jamie Wyeth and Rudolf Nuriev, and has lots and lots to tell us about this cycle of portraits. And I thought that we might start out with a look at the Cadmus painting that I will I want to be sure to devote enough time to Amanda, because she's really an expert in and is so fully knowledgeable about the portraits and the artist, whereas my knowledge is not as in-depth, but I do want to give you the basics, let's say, of Le Ruban des Nuits. And it's all about this turn of the century composer that was depicted by Paul Cadmus in 1963. So actually, Ronaldo Hahn died in the late 1940s. And so this 1947, so this is indeed a posthumous image, but it's an imaginary image that departs from much of Cadmus's other work. And it has to do with the theme of artistic inspiration of this composer, who shown in a classical arcade, or I guess technically it's a blind arcade, semicircular in shape on a stepped platform. So it's a classical architectural setting in which the artist is shown. And there are classical figures around him, a sprite, a winged figure, and a figure of Pan, a male god. And both of these figures function as muses, hence the male muses of the title of the talk. And this is a conversation, not a talk. And so you see Hahn with his top hat and cane on a chair opposite him, as he looks as if he's starting to compose a piece of music. The sheets of music fly off of his lap as drapery unfurls as he's being kissed by the sprite, by the male muse. So it's a pretty bold gay theme painted by a gay artist. in an important 20th century American artist, Paul Cadmus. And so these are the 4 drawings. I showed one of them in the introductory slide. And these came to us as a wonderful surprise, as a gift from a collector in Houston who purchased them a few months prior, as per my understanding, and thought so generously of the Columbus Museum of Art and offered them to us. 2 of the drawings consist of draperies, and the other 2 are parts of the principal figure's body, his shoes, his crossed legs. And what's really exciting, there are a number of reasons we're so exciting to get these drawings. This is one of the few instances, perhaps the only, where we have this number of preparatory studies in relationship to a painting that's in our permanent collection. And we've had this painting by Cadmus since since 2005. It came to us as part of a large collection of social realist art called the Schiller Collection, a private collection from a collector in the Chicago suburbs that we acquired many prints and a substantial body of important paintings, including this one. So we've had it for a number of years, and we're delighted to have these preparatory studies that are not only of interest to the general public, but opposite, or literally across the street from the museum, is a school of art, the Columbus College of Art and Design. So to have these available for students to see and better understand the artistic process of an important large painting in the collection is wonderful. And then aesthetically, each of these works, they're just such a delight. Each is an independent, or can be viewed as a standalone independent tour de force in the virtuosity of drawings in charcoal and preparatory studies. Beautifully selected paper, different colored paper, and the medium that's used, the charcoal and the drawing medium are used in a way that really emphasizes the fine detail, the contours, just a beautiful passages showing modeling. And this is the way, this is an installation shot, the way that they are currently displayed on either side of the painting. As I said, in the corridor in our Ross building, our so-called historic building, as opposed to the new wing, the Walter wing that opened several years ago. So the subject of the painting, Rinaldo Hahn, I mentioned that he was a composer, musician, performer, music critic. And he was a dapper dresser, as you can see in this photograph of him from 1906. And that elegance is reflected in Paul Cadmus's painting. And he was a gay figure in turn of the century Paris, born in Venezuela. He lived a rather closeted existence, however, in terms of his personal life. It is known that he had a romantic liaison for 2 years with Marcel Proust in the 1890s, but their friendship continued until the death of Proust. And the way that he is depicted by Cadmus with these male muse figures that are nude or semi-nude is, even though the imaginative content and the fact that the work is set in the rather distant past, there are consistencies in the art of Cadmus that if we back up a few decades and look at the way in which this artist, and here's his photograph in 1937, he emerged in the 1930s, grew up in New York, was trained in New York, spent a few years in Europe, and then one of his first active roles as an artist was as an artist working under the Works Progress Administration during the Depression, public funding given to artists to help Americans survive the Depression and pay them through the government for their work. And this painting, The Fleet's Inn, or it's simply called Fleet's Inn, showing a shore leave of sailors and civilians was so controversial because of the homoerotic content. There's flirtation, both heterosexual and homosexual, going on, and the gay content was so controversial that the painting was removed from public view for many, many years. And similarly, the gilding the acrobats on the right was, well, it's similar in that there's the idealized male human form, in this case nude, but in an acceptable way, because the context in which the man being painted or gilded is shown is part of the professional life of the figure portrayed, so that athletes, acrobats, boxers, and so on. This was a way in which gay artists during the Depression, like Cadmus, could, in painting, sculpture, etc., show the nude male idealized human form. And in both cases, these are works that would conform to the American scene painting movement. In other words, a movement that developed between World War I and II that involved realistic depictions of Americans in everyday life in a recognizably realistic style, as opposed to the abstract mode of artistic presentation that had flourished prior to World War I and continued between the wars. But American scene painting, and sometimes it overlaps with the movement called regionalism, these tended to dominate American painting. And then moving forward into the 1940s, a painting that will be familiar to visitors of the Columbus Museum of Art, the Heron Massacre, in which you again have the nude male form, but this time in a context that could be considered rather inappropriate in terms of the erotic presentation of these corpses that were the result of a labor dispute, a very violent, ugly labor dispute in Southern Illinois that took place in the 1920s. So this is a historical painting, somewhat like Ronaldo Hahn in that it's set in the past, but yet it's realistically shown, or at least, yes, it's very stylized, but there are no supernatural elements. And the point that I wanted to make by showing these works of art to the right is the fact that there was a great reliance of the art of Cadmus on classical art of the past. And that applies to these works that I just showed as well. His medium, for example, is egg tempera rather than oil, which is a more painstaking medium that required smooth surfaces, sharp contours, and it was overpainting or repainting areas was difficult. So it was a challenge artistically. And the reverence and respect for art of the past is seen in the way in which certain poses of these figures, for example, the figure in the left foreground is very similar to the Christ figure of this Mannerist 16th century painting by Rosso Fiorentino, A Dead Christ. And the way that this figure with the orange trousers has his legs akimbo. I think today we call it man spreading for men that take up too much space on trains and subways. But at any rate, that kind of pose, it can be traced, at least in part, to the classical sculpture, the famous Barberini faun. And another dimension of the relationship to the artistic past is the fact that, as did many Renaissance painters, Heron shows the same figure twice, even though they're different people. He shows the pose of this figure in the foreground with his knees bent upside down in the figure next to him. And then this figure on his back with the legs spread apart is shown more or less stomach down right next to him. And that was quite a familiar practice in the Renaissance. And then moving on to the way in which I mentioned that these figures, the sprite and the figure of Pan, who's a kind of satyr, or he has the form of a satyr in Greek, or faun in Roman mythology, roughly similar, male figures that are human, except for goat ears from the waist up and goat-like from the waist down. these figures serve as muses, as sources of inspiration, taking the place of traditionally female muses. And there is the traditional depiction and the portrayal of muses in classical literature and art as these 9 female figures, each in charge of a different branch of the arts, music, poetry, theater, etc., that would surround Apollo, who besides being god of the sun was the god of the arts, and they would hang out on Mount Parnassus, the mount of inspiration, and they drink waters from the Castalian font. And these females would, in a very sexist, politically incorrect way, the females would inspire the male creators, be they musicians, writers, or artists. So the kiss of the sprite, the winged figure, is responsible most directly for it in this representation, the musical composition that Ronaldo Hahn seems to be working on. And then in this particular instance, looking for classical sources of inspiration, the Apollo Belvedere, a Hellenistic sculpture that shows a sleek, almost or a sleek male body with the musculature suppressed in favor of a graceful, lithe presentation of this slender body. You can see the relationship in the way that the figure is converted from a vertical to a horizontal stance, and then there are so many representations of satyrs, fauns, or figures of Pan in art from the Renaissance to the, well, this is an example from the late 19th century, but just to give you an example of another faun that, and these were figures that were connected, I think I might have said, with wine and lust and drinking, and they were connected with the Greek god Dionysus, who took the Roman form of Bacchus. And so here you see him surrounded by female figures, nymphs, maenads, or another kind of female figure that would hang out with Pan or with satyrs. So here he's being dragged into the water by these playful nymphs. And I'm so glad that among the many connections that we can make between the two installations, the Cadmus and the Wyeth works, is the fact that Jamie Wyeth depicted a faun as one of the 6, it's one of the 6 works that we borrowed from the Brandywine Museum. So I think I might turn it over to Amanda now. And I'm looking forward, well, Amanda and I, of course, we talked about what we're going to be presenting, but I always enjoy, every time I listen to Amanda talk about this material, I learn more and more, and I'm continually fascinated. So take it away, Amanda. Thank you.
Okay, I am pleased to be here with you all virtually in some way in Columbus, but I also have been looking at the participants, and there are some familiar names there, so I know we have some Brandywine region viewers as well. I thought I'd share with you just the briefest introduction to Jamie Wyeth's career, and then focus really intently on the Nuriev material, which is on loan to the Columbus Museum. And it is by far one of his great series of works that is inspired by what is undoubtedly a great male muse in the figure of Rudolf Nuriev. In fact, Jamie Wyeth doesn't use the term muse so much as the term obsession, as explaining how he became so involved with painting the portraits of the dancer again and again. So I'm starting here with an image that I just took a couple weeks ago, having an opportunity to visit with Jamie in the NC Wyeth studio, which is part of the Brandywine Museum's holdings. If you visit us here, you can visit the studios and homes of NC Wyeth, Jamie's grandfather, and Andrew Wyeth, Jamie's father. Sometimes I lapse into just calling him Jamie because there are so many Wyeths on our plate here at the Brandywine. So Jamie is 74 years old now, and he is the third generation in this great family of American artists. And you can see him here in his grandfather's studio, where he's surrounded by the props of the late 19th and early 20th century artists who would have collected history books, costumes, guns, all sorts of things to make their works, especially N.C. Wyeth's illustrations, come alive. Jamie follows in his father and his grandfather and their master teacher Howard Pyle's footsteps by following the mantra of painting what you know well. And one of the things that Jamie got to know well over the course of his career is the body of Rudolf Nuriev. And so why don't we take a look, David, at the works on view at Columbus in this next slide. So if you haven't been in, I just wanted to give you a sense of what they look like hanging and how they're arranged. And so you'll see each of these works as we go along on our talk today. So Jamie Wyeth started out as a very advanced, I would say teenager, but honestly, some of his preteen works are very, very sophisticated as well. But by the time he's a teenager, he's a successful artist selling works. In fact, he makes his first trip to New York City, where he first becomes involved with the ballet and with some of the figures we're going to talk about as we go along today, as he's still a teenager in the mid-1960s. But we'll fast forward a little bit into the 1970s, where Jamie Wyeth was introduced to the dancer Rudolf Nuriev, and he immediately knew he wanted to paint Nuriev, but Nuriev refused. He had had a bad experience with another artist who never painted him as he liked to be seen. And so after some persistence, Jamie was able to convince Nuriev, who had previously been a superstar dancer in Russia and had defected from Russia to the West and had been a star of the Paris Opera Ballet and had been the superstar partner to Margot Fonteyn before he came to North America. And at this point in the 1970s, when he met up with Jamie, he was working with the School of American Ballet in New York. Why don't you go ahead to the next image, David? And I want to tell you a little bit about Jamie's working process. And this is a working process that's not just how he treats Nuriev, but with all of his subjects, all of his obsessions, whether they're human or animal or object. He likes to get to know them as much physically as possible. And that means even here in these views of sketchbooks that are in the Brandywine's collection, taking detailed notes of the dancers' bodies. Now you see on the image on the left, this is not a very artistic rendering of the dancers' bodies, but it does serve to give proportions. And you can see these studies, these technical studies of the dancer's body building through the number of sketchbooks that he used to help him along getting to know Nuriev's body. So if you look at the image on the right, you see how he works is not by measurement in inches or centimeters, but by using a sculptural tool, a calipers, which you see an image of on the lower left, but it's sort of like a measuring device for transferring sizes or for taking a sort of proportional measurement. So you see he's taken a measurement of the width of Nuriev's ankle. And then that measurement he finds is 1, 2, 3, 4 lengths equals the length of Nuriev's calf. And his knee is approximately the same as one ankle width. And then I just show you here a detail from one of the sketchbook pages that is just lists and lists of measurements of every part of the dancer's body. And that is how Nuriev, or rather how Wyeth works with all of his subjects, not through photographs, but by getting to know them physically. So why don't we go on to the next and see the next step in building up that knowledge of another's body. So in the 1970s, and you see, oh, we're missing a date, but I see 1977 on each of these was the time period when Jamie finally convinced Nuriev to pose for him. But he would not model as a regular, artist model and hold still. He allowed Jamie to come to rehearsals and class and observe him dancing, which is tough to sketch, I would imagine, and if nobody's holding still. So we see in his 1970s sketches these candid moments of the dancer. And if you're familiar, you know, seeing dancers at work, they kind of all look like studio moments in the studio when the dancers just stopped for rest for a moment. But the technique that Jamie uses is this toned paper that he uses gouache, charcoal, ink to get the forms of the body. He's measured the body and now he's getting the forms, the shadows and the highlights, and causing the flesh to appear over the skeleton that's underneath. So he's physically understanding the anatomy of Nuriev as we go along. I brought along the image on the right, which is not at Columbus. It's another one of those fur coat pictures. And you see just the outline of the fur coat in the one that's at Columbus. The only painting that Jamie finished of the dancer Nuriev during Nuriev's lifetime was rather a static piece in which Nuriev was standing in a ballet studio in front of a bar wearing a fur coat, just staring straight ahead. And in fact, there's a kind of a hesitancy to finish. I think it's like a researcher who continues to research and research and research and never writes the finished product, right? There's this compulsion to go on. Why don't you go ahead to the next slide, David? So I'm showing you two more of these half-tone type drawings, but you'll see there's a difference. There's a change stylistically between the two. So the one on the left is called Half Smile Nuriev Study number 20 from 1977. And you see more of the musculature of the arm. You see some of the ribs. He's got now also a very characteristic, very animated facial expression as well. And he's using the advantages of working in what Jamie calls combined mediums, which really just means anything and everything he can get his hands on to make a mark. The one on the right-hand side, you'll notice is double dated. And there are a number of Nuriev pieces, and there are dozens and dozens of them that Jamie has done that are double dated. And this one is 1977/1993. What he's done is taken a study that he began in 1977, probably not unlike the one on the left, and he has worked it over again. And you see now his handling of the medium, whatever it might be, chalk, crayon, charcoal, oil crayons, is rougher, it's heavier. You see the marks, the contrast is high and sharp now of a bright light on the chest and then deeper shadows along the thighs and under the chin. So Jamie has progressed in the interim years, but what's also happened is that Rudolf Nuriev died in early 1993 of complications from HIV/AIDS. And so this obsession that Jamie had in the late 1970s of a muse that he could always go to, who he had literally memorized the body of, was no longer in this world. And he had only his memories and his studies and his sketches and his sketchbooks to work from. The 1993 date is an early reworking because he continues for the next 10 years to rework and create new works about and on the theme of Rudolf Nuriev. And let me just give you a quote here. You know, there's a long history of artists and dancers relationships. And in a bigger presentation, I would draw them all in. I would give you Degas and his ballet dancers and so many more. But there's one thing that Degas, Edgar Degas, the French Impressionist painter of the Paris Opera Ballet, said about, not specifically about painting dancers, but it's something that I really think resonates with what happens with Jamie Wyeth's work after Rudolf Nuriev passes away. Degas says, "It is all very well to copy what you see. It is much better to draw what you only see in memory. Then you get a transformation during which imagination collaborates with memory. You reproduce only what has struck you. In other words, the essentials. There are recollections and your fancy are set free from the tyranny exerted by nature." So beginning in 1993, Jamie Wyeth was set free of the tyranny, if there was such a thing, of having this muse right before him. Why don't you go ahead to the next slides? I love that this particular work, the faun on the left-hand side, which is on view at Columbus, does tie so well back to the Paul Cadmus painting that's also on view. It's a classical figure, a mythological figure that Cadmus was using to illuminate the life and the story of Rinaldo Hahn. Rudolf Nuriev, on the other hand, was someone who danced classical roles. He danced Don Quixote and Sleeping Beauty and Swan Lake and all the classics. But in the 1980s, he took on a role that was considered modern. That modern ballet he danced was called Afternoon of the Faun. I will not try and pronounce the French for you. It was a classical subject, a faun, nymphs, and the aesthetic was classical. It tried to imitate Grecian urns and the stiff black and red figures of Grecian urns. But the period it was created in was modern. So on the left-hand side, you see Jamie Wyeth's vision of Rudolf Nuriev as the faun, one of these works that began in 1977, probably as a much more basic tonal drawing, and then progressed in 2002 to become a hairy beast with horns that is the personification of an actual faun or a satyr as in the Han. I'm showing you on the right-hand side the illustration for the ballet's original production, which was always a great collaboration between dancers, musicians, and graphic artists. So in this case, Leon Basques had done the set design and the program and the costume design for Afternoon of the Faun. And you see in this comparison that even though Nuriev danced the role of the faun from the Afternoon of the Faun, Jamie did not image him in the very specific costume of the faun. Why don't you go to the next slide and you'll see Nijinsky, Vaslav Nijinsky was the originator of the role of the faun, and he is there in the original costume designed in 1912. And it's almost like a cow print, you know, it's probably not very nice to say, but it was very modern and stylized. And you can see his movements, and I'm doing it here as if you can see it, as almost becoming a figure on a Grecian urn. On the right-hand side is Rudolf Nuriev's interpretation of the faun, the role of the faun. So you see he's got the classic costume on with the golden wig and this body hugging leotard and the laurels and ivy around his waist. But Jamie chooses to create him through memory and imagination as an actual faun, as an actual satyr. It transforms the dancer into something he never was in reality. Although to say he never danced in that costume is one thing, but he was incredibly animal-like. One of the stories that Jamie has often told about his long friendship with Nuriev is how after performances, Nuriev would come to Chad's Ford to kind of take it easy and rest and visit. And Jamie and his wife Phyllis would welcome him into their home in Chad's Ford, or rather in the Brandywine region. They have a home called Point Lookout. And having just come off stage, Nuriev would want to take a soak in the tub, right? And relax his muscles and get a massage. And Jamie recalls seeing him moving through the house in these post-performance times and thinking he looked incredibly animal-like. He said, is that a man? Is that a woman? Is that a leopard? What's moving through our house? So he saw this animal side in Nuriev as well, and his elegance of movement, that he was more than just a human, he was something beyond. Why don't we talk a little bit more about costumes? On the next slide, you'll see one of the other pieces of our collection at the Brandywine that's come from Jamie Wyeth's own collections are a number of costumes that Rudolf Nuriev wore. And these are things that the Brandywine has collected from other sources, but many have come from Jamie Wyeth, who had collected them in the auctions after Nuriev's death. When his estate was sold at, you know, all the greatest auction houses, and the memorabilia, the costumes, all sorts of things. His collection of fine furnishings were all sold, and Jamie has acquired some of the costumes at that time. So remember how we were building up from the basic structure of Nuriev's body to laying the skin, the flesh, the musculature on top. I think the final step in that is this work that Jamie does with costumes. You saw he created his own imagined costume for the faun, but with the accession or with the acquisition of these costumes, Jamie then had the physical form of Rudolf Nuriev back in his studio, even after the dancer had passed away. And I think it's part of what reignites and re-sparks Jamie to go back to work on these again, not just in tribute to someone who has passed away, but to return to that obsession, that body that he had so memorized that he could draw it without the model in front of him. And so we see here two views of the doublet that Nuriev wore for Swan Lake, which he often said was his favorite role to dance. And then if we go ahead one more slide, you'll see how Jamie used the doublet from Swan Lake in two of the images that are on view at Columbus. And you also are observing here how Jamie's style has continued to evolve, moving away from the visual realism of something like an academic Renaissance master to something much more imaginative and much more expressionistic. So on the left-hand side, the dancer exists in kind of a starry, amorphous space, not really meant to be on stage, not really meant to be indoors or outdoors. You see stars all around him. And he is doing just a kind of action from Swan Lake. But I tell you, if there are ballet dancers out there, you're going to look at that hand and say, that is not an approved hand motion. I think the same thing of many of Degas' dancers. When I look at them, my ballet teacher would have rapped my knuckles if I had done some movement like the ballet dancers in Degas. Both Jamie and Degas capture these off moments, these private, candid moments to their dancers at some point. Now on the right-hand side is a piece called Curtain Call, and it's almost in this hazy, sepia-toned light that could be both the spotlight that's so bright on Nuriev at the end of the performance, or also kind of the haze of memory. Curtain calls were important to Nuriev, and he is often quoted as saying he judged his own performances based on the length of a curtain call that he got. And so he may have thought he danced well, but if he didn't get as long of a curtain call as the night before, there was something wrong with the performance. So these two pieces take that costume that Jamie by then had in his studio and transform it into a work of art when he no longer has the body of the dancer in front of him. Why don't we go over to the next slide? So David, I thought we might open up, and there's so many stories and so many connections between how male muses and artists work together, or sometimes work against each other, I suppose. And there are so many topics to talk about. Maybe there are some connections with Cadmus in some of these as well.
Well, first of all, I don't know if I made it. Well, I think I mentioned it in passing that the reason for the loan of the Nuriev portraits was because a local theater company was going to present this play, Nuriev's Eyes, by, can you remind me of the playwright?
Yes, his name is David Rush.
David Rush. And unfortunately, because of COVID, the production was canceled. And we're hoping that in either the coming year or coming years, but sometime in the future, we are certainly hoping that the production can be presented. And it was to be staged by CATCO, C-A-T-C-O, for those not in Columbus. That stands for Contemporary American Theater Company, and it's a theater company that's located pretty much right across the street from the Ohio State House on High Street in downtown Columbus. And they stage wonderful productions. And I was really happy that that I'll be able in this program to share information. Well, the information is coming one way, essentially from Amanda about the production, which she has extensive experience and background in terms of participating to help prepare the actors and the various production designers for the mounting of the plays.
Yeah, so
Go on.
this is, let me just tell you about the play in general. It's called Nuriev's Eyes, and it is a two-man play because this relationship, actual, imagined, whatever it might be, between the painter and the dancer, and the two of them as artists, and how they may or may not have had, you know, these imagined conversations about being artists, about their own work, about their careers, their illustrations. They're brought to life in David Rush's play called Nuriev's Eyes, which fictionalizes to an extent the meeting of Jamie Wyeth and Rudolf Nuriev, and works through their time together as artist and muse, as model and painter, and shares stories where each of them is either becoming well known, as the young Jamie Wyeth in the 1970s still was working under the shadow of his father at that point, and Rudolf Nuriev, who was such a celebrity at the time, coming together and finding common ground in this production. And I've seen the production many times in many different states, the premiere in Florida. And if you go on to the next slide, the dancers, when they had the production in Delaware, the cast came to see the Brandywine, and we showed them all of the Nuriev sketchbooks that we own, the costumes, the paintings, so that the actors themselves could get a sense of Jamie's work from that period, since there were, you know, videos to watch of Nuriev dancing, but to get at what Jamie was doing. And then you see there are three actors there with me in the museum. The actors on both the far left and far right both played Rudolf Nuriev in different productions, and the gentleman standing closest to me played Jamie Wyeth, and he really looks like Jamie Wyeth on top of it all. The gentleman on the far left side is was a professionally trained ballet dancer in Russia who took on the role of Nuriev. So though the conversations and the relationship is fictionalized for the point of this play, it is really based on a real body of work that were shared by these two artists.
And Amanda, is it a one-act play or two?
No, it's a full-length, two acts, full-length play. Yes, that goes all the way from their first meeting to Nuriev's death in 2003. Yes.
I'm looking so forward to seeing it. Do you know if the script has been published, if people want to read it?
I don't believe it's been published, although it has been produced at many theaters. So in that respect, it might be a little bit more accessible, but I don't believe it's published yet. Theater aficionados among you would probably know how to find those scripts.
Okay, thank you.
So we were talking about celebrity, right? And obviously with Paul Cadmus or with the Ronaldo Hahn, there's a certain level of celebrity to that composer, to obviously Marcel Proust had a little celebrity status as well. But I found it really intriguing to look at some of Jamie's Nuriev works. And this is a work on the left-hand side that's not on view at Columbus, but it's representative of a good chunk of the Nuriev works that's so graphic, so poster-like. And I couldn't help but thinking of the post-impressionist Toulouse-Lautrec and how he, like in the image on the right-hand side, created posters for popular celebrity dancers at the time. Now, we're not talking about classical ballet when Toulouse-Lautrec is working. He's showing us here a dancer known as La Goulou, which is the glutton. She's a can-can dancer in Paris who's all the rage. And dancing in front of her here is a dancer known as Valentine the Boneless. And he would be the equivalent of like some hip hop dancers today that have that really fluid style that look like they have no bones. He was doing that in 1890s Paris. And in this flat, heavily outlined graphic style, Toulouse-Lautrec is creating their publicity. And then on the left-hand side, we see Jamie Wyeth imagining a poster for Nuriev as Don Quixote. And Don Quixote was another of the costumes that Jamie had acquired and had in his repertoire after Nuriev passed away. You see this is double dated 1977-2003. And speaking of the costumes, you know, we only have the doublets, the tops of the costumes, because the bottoms would mostly be tights. Except Don Quixote's traditional classical costume, he wore kind of like baggy pantaloons. And one night in the middle of a performance in London, I think, Nuriev kind of threw a temper tantrum and would not go out on stage for the second act in those baggy pants. And as you see him pictured here, he insisted on wearing white tights on stage with no trousers over them. And this made the intermission last like an hour long. And he finally went on stage and he broke with the tradition of those costumes because he really felt it hid his body. So you can imagine, once he gets an artist that he likes to work with, he's very eager to have that body captured correctly. So I always thought it probably comforted Nuriev to realize that Jamie was taking such detailed and sharp measurements so everything would be accurate. Oh, I think there's another Toulouse-Lautrec.
And I just wanted to take a minute to explain how much I love this comparison, because you did mention that Nuriev was a superstar, and he helped blur the lines between a kind of a highbrow art form of the ballet and popular culture. He went to Studio 54. He was a media darling in his day. Younger listeners may not be aware, if they haven't lived through it, weren't present when during his lifetime. And similarly, Toulouse-Lautrec blurs the line between, in terms of his poster art, commercial art form, and fine art form, and bringing the world of popular culture and celebrity culture into the fine art world.
Yeah, so. And where Nuriev lets off is where Baryshnikov picks up as that celebrity that then went to Hollywood. And I don't know if it's true, there are lines in the play about this, about how, you know, Baryshnikov and Nuriev danced for opposite companies in New York too. And so they just, there's a kind of professional rivalry, certainly, because by then, you know, Baryshnikov was the new defector on the scene, and Nuriev was, you know, in danger of being upstaged.
Good old Cold War days.
Yeah. Yes, this is it. So just another comparison, a work that we recently acquired from Jamie's wife, Phyllis Mills Wyeth, when she passed away last year. This was part of the Nuriev body of work that was originally created, and we had negotiated to acquire at the Brandywine, but the caveat was that because Jamie's wife, Phyllis, loved this picture so much, she would retain it until her death, and then she did leave it to the museum as a bequest. But when I see it as an art historian, but I can't help but seeing Toulouse-Lautrec's poster of Aristide Bruant, a cabaret performer from late 19th century Paris. And I should mention that Nuriev is not sickly looking in this image. He was dancing the role at the time, or when Jamie was modeling, or when he was modeling for Jamie, a role called Pierre Lumière, which was a figure from the Commedia dell'arte. So he would wear this stark white makeup and dark, heavy mascara. And Jamie did other portraits of him in this makeup. And there are a lot of detailed sketches in the sketchbooks of Jamie watching Nuriev put on the makeup and watching the dancer paint his own face. So the painter watching the dancer painting his own body. And then during the day, he'd dance the role in the matinee and not take off the makeup and come back and dance the role again in the evening. And he would go about on the streets of New York in his coat and his hat and his scarf with the makeup on in the streets of New York.
That's my favorite story or factoid of all. Thanks. Oops.
Yeah.
Oh, and we have, before we hit the 3 o'clock mark, I think
Yes.
we have about 6 more minutes. So I'd love to go through the rest of the slides, but I think we need to pick
That's
up the
fine.
pace a bit.
That's fine. So just quickly, Jamie had also a relationship, a friendship that he built up with Andy Warhol, which is another, kind of those interesting celebrity status artists of the period. And they painted each other's portraits. And so you'll see as you go into these next images, Jamie, this sort of autograph signing when the two of them had a show together. And Warhol was a very popular artist. Of course, his shows would sell out. But when the opening of the Jamie Wyeth, Andy Warhol show happened in New York, and it was really mobbed because it brought a different audience, an audience of Wyeth fans to Warhol's work. And an interviewer at the opening asked Andy Warhol why he thought this show was so popular, so well attended. And he said it was because he thought that Jamie Wyeth looked like a can of soup, which is the ultimate Andy Warhol compliment, right? If you look like a can of soup, then you are worthy of being painted, baby. And this is just, I mentioned the process that Jamie went through to measure and study Nuriev's body. He did the same with Andy Warhol's body. So you see in the lower left, he's got the calipers around Warhol's jaw, and this is all staged for publicity. Jamie measures Warhol, Warhol photographs Jamie. The two of them have their works on display.
Cue the caliper.
Exactly. Tell me how you did it. Well, so one of the other topics that ties our two artists together is the 7 deadly sins, which is a universal Christian story that's been painted by many artists, and feel free to flow through these, David, of those 7 deadly sins: greed and lust and pride and anger and jealousy and gluttony, and I've forgotten some, but even Jamie takes his particular, another obsession route with this, with his seagulls. Another obsession that he had, and he transforms the 7 deadly sins into behaviors by the seagulls. Yeah, you can go ahead, that Hieronymus Bosch image. So back as far as the 15th century, artists were doing the 7 deadly sins, as was Paul Cadmus. So this is Paul Cadmus's version of the 7 deadly sins, which belonged to a man named Lincoln Kirsten, who was the head of the New York City Ballet at the time. In fact, there's Jamie Wyeth's sketch and portrait of Kirsten. The very first time Jamie Wyeth came to New York in 1965 was to do this portrait, and he's still a teenager at this point, and he is staying with his family friend, Lincoln Kirsten. And Kirsten had married Paul Cadmus's wife. So Cadmus and Wyeth have this connection through Lincoln Kirsten. So here's Kirsten's portrait done by Paul Cadmus. Lincoln Kirsten owned Cadmus's 7 deadly sins, and they would have been in his New York apartment. They're now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, donated by Lincoln Kirsten. But it would have been something, Cadmus's work was certainly something that Jamie saw in that early period, 1965 in New York. So another link between our two artists. Oh, Kirsten, if you have time, watch The Monuments Men again, or read the book, because the actual figure of Lincoln Kirsten, he was one of the Monuments Men, and he's such a background figure. He keeps such a low profile during the war, but he was instrumental in the recovery of the Ghent altarpiece, which had been first in Neuschwanstein Castle and then hidden in the German salt mines. And when the Ghent altarpiece made its kind of victory tour around the United States, Lincoln Kirsten came to the Wyeths to visit and took Jamie's father, Andrew, to the National Gallery of Art to view this work that he had helped to recover in Germany. So Kirsten is endlessly fascinating, as he is even the linchpin between our two artists here today.
Mm. Well, that's a great note to conclude on. We have a few more minutes, and well, actually now 1 more minute. And I checked our question chat line, and there don't seem to be any questions, but just wanted to add that and I don't know if we mentioned it, but the gay connection with Nuria, that Nuriev was was gay.
Yes, and you know, it was in a time period, of course, when someone with the celebrity status of Nuriev couldn't necessarily keep all of his private life private. But by the time he died in 1993, it was in the full-blown midst of the AIDS crisis, and it was, you know, it was not, it was completely out in the open that he had the AIDS virus, and it was part of living as a homosexual man in the 1980s and not 70s, 80s, and 90s in this period. And so while I'm often asked if the two of them had a relationship, Jamie is married by then. His wife Phyllis, and he hosts Nuriev. And I think it's almost more like a family relationship that the two men had, but the intense gaze of one man on another man's body can't be denied. And Jamie would, you know, as an artist and as, you know, as a human, this appreciation of what had got to have been the most perfect male form of the moment, being this dancer of such great renown and celebrity. At least Nuriev definitely thought he was the most perfect male form imaginable at the time.
So you can't dispute that. And then I just wanted to reinforce the fact that these two installations, they came about through such unrelated circumstances, and it was such a happy accident that they're related in so many interesting, fascinating ways. And in terms of timing, and again, this is random, but it just so happened that they both went up in the month of October, which is LGBTQ History Month. So we had some markers that the Columbus Museum of Art was celebrating LGBTQ History Month with these two installations. And they also come to the museum, or they were installed shortly after the close of an exhibition that had originated with the Columbus Museum and toured a number of other museums, but closed here. Art After Stonewall, 1969 to 89. So it was really great to have some continuity with the theme of that exhibition through these two installations. And I see there's one question. Let me read it. Saw Nuriev dance here in Columbus in 1969 with the Australian Ballet. Saw him afterwards coming out of the stage door in a full-length mink coat with leather bands crisscrossing his chest. Beautiful performance, and this lucky 16-year-old then got his autograph. Wonderful.
And maybe it makes, yeah, I'm sure there are others who've had that experience. As part of our Nuriev collection at the Brandywine, we have a number of his personal papers as well. And I can tell you, he kept his fan letters and his gifts and things that were sent to him. We have a number of them sent by school children who had come to see him perform and sent him letters. And so it's touching that in the research materials to find that this major celebrity dancer retained until his death these letters from children and admirers.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, I have another, this is more of a comment. Thank you for the program today. This was my first, and it was so easy. Oh, we love to hear that. Just curious about how many attended today. So we've got two of our people that work on technology that I think are listening in, Nick or Mark. Do you know how many people we've got in our audience, in our online audience today? If either of you can unmute yourselves.
Yes, David, we had 46 people join us today.
Okay, thank you for that information. Fantastic. Well, now is, I think, the time to truly wind up, and we both have a few words to say about our respective museums. Amanda, do you want to start?
Yeah, so, for those of you who are in our area or who might come our way at another time, especially during the holiday time, it's holiday magic at the Brandywine. where we have on view a number of model trains and dolls and dollhouses that belong to both, that were collected by the museum, but many that belong to the Wyeth family. So it's all Wyeth all the time here, even at the holidays. Jamie Wyeth's model train set is on view this year that he bought on a shopping trip at FAO Schwartz with Andy Warhol. So we are open with our holiday show up through January 10th, but all year long, you can visit and see the magic of the Wyeths and take in our historic properties, which includes, as I mentioned, the homes and studios of N.C. Wyeth and Andrew Wyeth, and part of Jamie Wyeth's very first studio as well.
Great. Oh, I see a third question. Let's see. Oh, thank you both for the marvelous and informative webinar. Well, thank you for listening and for that very kind comment. And so let me conclude with, actually, let me pop on the other image that I have here, that similarly for holidays, and I think it includes a train. I'm not sure. I apologize. And it varies a little each year. But for many years, we've had a Lego exhibition. It's called Think Outside the Brick. And it opens within about 9 days, November 27th. And so we invite you to see that. And although we do have timed tickets for the museum, they're recommended but not required. The museum is a safe environment in terms of public safety practices, sanitation, and so on. And we do invite you to visit the museum store, the Shaco Cafe, and holiday shopping. A snack or a meal at the cafe is a great way to help support the museum and do something that should be or would be very enjoyable in addition to seeing the galleries. So we are keeping our fingers crossed that we can stay open, and if it's assuming that we can, we are certainly committed to staying open safely. I should also mention that I believe you can go online and find out about takeaway Thanksgiving dinners that you can order if you want to carry out food to pick up on Thanksgiving or for your Thanksgiving meal. And so the details are online, and today is the last day that you can reserve in advance. So you might want to check that out. And here's our website, columbusmuseum.org. So, Amanda, any closing words or greetings?
Well, you just made me think that since we have all these new friends in Columbus now, I should point you to our website, which is brandywine.org, where our holiday gift guide is available. So maybe you can't come and see the Wyeths, but you can have a little souvenir of the Wyeths sent back to you.
Terrific. And we have another Wednesday at 2 program in December on an exhibition of the art of Amina Robinson called Raggin' On, a major, very large retrospective exhibition. And its curator, Carol Genshaft, will be the speaker on that day. So thanks, everybody. And till the next time, have a wonderful holiday. Be safe, be well, and best wishes for the holiday season. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.